After celebrating 50 years of TV, Doctor Who continued under showrunner Stephen Moffat and 12th Doctor Peter Capaldi. Quite possibly the most versatile actor to ever play the role of the Doctor, I firmly believe that you could place the 12th Doctor into any story from any era and he would 100% fit. But we're here today to discuss the best and worst the 12th Doctor had to offer. All 35 stories are ranked here. At the bottom of the barrel we have number 35, In the Forest of Night. Are you even surprised at this being at the bottom? I can't recall a Doctor Who story where virtually nothing happens as much as this one. In the Forest of the Night feels as though it's about 5 drafts away from being something very special. However, you would need to times the budget by 10, get rid of the ending, and completely revolutionise the characters and narrative in order for this to work, and tone down the annoying kids. But the biggest crime that this story commits is that it's just so boring and dull. Whilst I'm not against Doctor Who doing a whimsical one-off story where there isn't much of a threat, the execution of this story is just as dull as dishwater. With an initial interesting idea in the trees forming around Earth, it doesn't exactly do much with that concept really. It's too fairy tale and everything has to work out perfect for there to be any genuine threat. It's never quite explained just exactly what's going on, there's no real depth or actual science, it's just rather brushed over. There's no villains, just a brief appearance from a pack of wolves and then a tiger. Neither of them pose any real threat, leaving most of the story as just the characters wandering around aimlessly. For being the worst story the 12th Doctor era has to offer, In the Forest of the Night may look like a nice fairy tale, but it's about appealing as eating leaves. Number 34. Lie of the Land. I'm still scratching my head as to why the Monks trilogy of Series 10 was, well, a trilogy. I'm not sure where to start with the bad. The Monks failed to make any impression despite appearing in the equivalent of a classic Series 6-parter. The rule of tyranny is barely established before it's ignored in favour of all the character work. Doctor and Bill just feel out of character to a factor of 10. It's hard to believe that their interaction could be fudged this badly, given the excellent groundwork we've had in Season 10. The episode is paced very inconsistently with nothing truly exciting happening throughout, and a 5-minute interlude with Missy intruding in the middle to remind us of the story arc, and the ending, which in a long line of love conquers all ending, does fit a pattern in this era, but it just proves to be rather unsatisfying. Not to mention how this entire 3-parter is wiped from humanity's memory, rendering the whole exercise pointless. It's rare for a story to start as strongly as it did with Extremis, and then just hemorrhage continuously until it limps to such a bothersome conclusion. Not to mention, the episode plays out like an amalgamation of much better episodes, a pale retread of the Master 3-parter for Series 3 and Turn Left. I think Pyramid and Lie both have their emphasis wrong. The middle part should have dealt with the heavy characterization and the climax should have been a lot heavier on plot, whereas here it's more like the reverse, especially when the characterization here is just so lacking. The Doctor and Bill coming out of the story with plenty of egg on their faces. The Lie of the Land may come across as a vital arc of Series 10, but it just comes across as a waste of time more than anything. Number 33. Pyramid at the End of the World. This is a largely empty affair that feels once again like setup for the main event rather than the meat in a 3-part sandwich. The Pyramid at the End of the World sacrifices its characters to the plot, a wealth of guest characters in this story, but I at no point felt as if I got to know them. They are simply functions of a glacial plot. I'm not even sure what to think of the Monks. On the one hand, it's quite novel to have a different kind of invasion story, one where they will only invade humanity once they've given their consent. However, it doesn't make them the most exciting of monsters, just twiddling their tendrils and hanging about waiting for a duff move to be made on humanity's part. They featured in 2 episodes and you just feel like you know nothing about them, their motives or their history. The first 10 minutes do feel kind of fresh and interesting. The idea of a 5,000-year-old pyramid appears overnight is a striking idea. I expected the initial talk to give way to some action which never really comes to anything. It doesn't help that things are boiled down to their most simplistic level, with the disaster that will bring the world to its knees being insultingly signposted, and the bringing together of the military leaders failing to work on any plausible level. Pyramid at the End of the World is trying to do something different, which should be applauded. However, within its intriguing premise, it's a plodding and childish affair, and the talk there is lacks punch and comes across as just very flaccid. You're best off skipping the most of the Monk arc. Number 32. The Caretaker. Now, what to think of The Caretaker? It was entertaining enough, but I did spend most of the 45 minutes wondering why I was watching this instead of something more engaging. 45 minutes passed harmlessly enough. Some of it made me smirk, some of it made me check my watch, and most of the relationship stuff just fell flat because it was told without any joy. It's all character development, but a story here is barely considered. If the domestic drama played for real without the entertainment value of warm and funny characters that makes getting close to them worthwhile, Clara and Danny's love affair might just be the most somber relationship ever. It's missing two things that really make it work: humour and passion, in contrast to the Doctor and Clara's relationship that's really started to gel, and they share a number of moments in The Caretaker where the characters do shine together. It might have something to do with how Clara just feels wrong-footed throughout this episode and how the Doctor keeps her constantly on her toes, but I'm not sure why we had to dedicate an episode of Danny Pink meeting the Doctor. If you wanted it to have more of an impact here, it should have had more punch to it, but The Caretaker just comes across as a waste of time. Number 31. Kill the Moon. I'm torn about this episode, literally split down the middle. Kill the Moon I understand is a divisive episode amongst fans. Some seem to love it and others seem to hate it, whereas I see both the good and the bad. I find the easy diamond in the rough to be 12 and Clara, a duo I often forget how much I like due to Clara being such a temperamental companion, and they're easily placed in one of the best character situations they found themselves in. The Doctor completing his arc of "Am I a good man?" throughout Series 8, he abandons Clara so she can make up her own mind on a situation through some faux moral system. I think the Doctor being a character who can make terrible decisions like this and hurt people due to his disconnect from humanity is a really refreshing thing that they brought to the table. And it's brilliant to see the Doctor be like this. It reminds us that he's not human, he is an alien. And the scene at the end with Clara finally snapping in the TARDIS is really, really good, and both actors knock it out of the park. Now, Moon being an egg isn't a problem I have with the episode. The idea of humanity deciding the fate of the egg, it's the fact that only half the Earth in darkness will be able to decide. Does the revised series seriously not get how time zones work of the Earth? Only half of the people are able to turn their lights on and off because only half the Earth is probably going to be in darkness. Top that off with Courtney, who is a prime example of why kids should not be allowed in the TARDIS, and you have a real hodgepodge here of good and bad. I could sum this up as a rough diamond, a sparkle on occasion, but putting it just feels very rough. 30. Twice Upon a Time. A story that didn't really need to exist and was put together at the last minute. It could have been a lot better, but I think what we got was perfectly okay. While I think David Bradley is great as the first Doctor, I'm just not a big fan of the way he's characterised. Suppose Stephen Moffat was going for the whole "look how much we can change in our lives," but it just comes across as a step backwards for the first Doctor when you look at how much he grew over his initial tenure. The Generation speech at the end of the episode is terrific. I feel the whole episode feels like it's just running on fumes, and while you can argue that's the point as a regeneration story doesn't need to be grand or epic, it kind of feels like a Children in Need short that was stretched out to over an hour. Take it for what it's worth, but I think we're all agreed that the Series 10 finale should have been the end for the 12th Doctor. Number 29. Sleep No More. Not really a fan of found footage stories, but did this episode win me over? Well, yes and no. It's got interesting ideas, a unique format, it's campy and spooky, but it doesn't do any of those well enough to be considered great. Certainly should be talked about more and given the benefit of the doubt. This isn't going to be seen as some underrated masterpiece anytime soon. I think it's just a case of an episode getting less and less interesting as it goes on. The Sandmen are a great concept on paper, and in that final scene with Shearsmith's crumbling face, but when they're wandering about corridors, they're just nothing but scary monsters that we have to get rid of. With their evil plan to make must-watch TV, they really could have been a smarter, more playful threat, like something more frightening rather than just generic zombies. Found footage is an interesting medium, but the format really could have been played with more considering the said villain's plan. These are of course just nitpicks, but these smaller issues build to make an episode that just loses me 20 minutes in. At the end of the day, it's sloppily ambitious and really something who should try more often. I guess I could sum this episode up as better luck next time. Number 28. Smile. Smile serves as the first proper adventure featuring Bill and 12, and I have some conflicting thoughts on it. There are quite a few positive aspects here. Peter Capaldi and Pearl Mackie are stupendous as always, and hands down the best part of this story are when Bill is trying to figure out why the TARDIS is a police box. I must also praise the effects, the sets look great, and I really like the music here, especially towards the end. Fortunately, there's not really much to sing praise about. The emoji robots was always going to be a dated concept, and it just feels like so much is crammed to reach the resolution. The heart of the episode is in the right place, but I don't think the execution entirely works. One thing, I don't quite follow the Doctor's reasoning that the robots are sentient. He says that because they are engaging in self-defense, they self-identify as a species. That doesn't really make much sense to me, since any advanced robot would of course be fitted with self-defense protocols. Plus, what he says to the medical staff basically boils down to, just live with the robots, otherwise they'll horribly kill you just like your families, or leave you to die of starvation. That isn't really coexistence so much as putting up with something that could kill you one day. Regardless, like the previous episode on this list, its heart is in the right place, but it doesn't quite come together as a whole. Number 27. Magician's Apprentice and the Witcher's Familiar. I feel we're now onto the first good story of this Doctor's era, and I feel the Series 9 opener encompasses both the strengths and weaknesses that Steven Moffat has as a writer. The Magician's Apprentice does take forever to get going, and struggles to justify this being 2 parts. I feel there's too much location hopping stretched over a thin and vague storyline. However, I feel as we get to The Witcher's Familiar, the plot picks up a lot more. The scenes between the Doctor and Davros are terrific, as Moffat scales back on trying to write a huge sprawling epic and focuses on the characters involved, and the results are pretty good. I like the scenes between Missy and Clara sneaking into the Dalek City, they're effectively done, though the whole thing does feel quite drawn out. Had this been a 60-minute season opener, I probably would have rated this a bit higher, but for being a solid nostalgia-baited season opener, it just about teets into the realm of good. Number 26. Return of the Mysterio. Doctor Who as a superhero movie, whilst the two elements may not mesh together entirely well, and plot-wise you're looking at a bit of a car crash of a story with some underdeveloped ideas, what salvages this story and lifts it surprisingly high in places is just the amount of heart on display. The nice kisses to the genre is cool, the stylish visuals, the character work, which whilst never aspiring to anything substantial, is nicely written and brought to the screen well by the cast. I really enjoyed the love triangle between Lucy, Grant and the Ghost, and the nice humour that arose from the situation. There really haven't been scenes like this in Doctor Who before, because these scenes aren't really Doctor Who, and it's not a bad thing to have. Justin Chatwin and Charity Wakefield deliver charming performances, and you're rooting for them all the way, even if their eventual kiss is pretty predictable at the end. It's the gentlest kind of romance. It's innocent that there's only one hit of sexual tension, but that's why it's enjoyable for all the family to watch. You know, Christmas time. There were moments where the direction worked very well. Private Wayne New York is brought to life, the honesty of the intimate character moments, and there were times where it does feel a bit sloppy, like the split screen sequences, the Doctor on the live camera, the pedestrian nature of how the aliens were presented. And to sum it up, I have seen better Christmas specials, but I've also seen far worse as well. Number 25. Face the Raven. Ominous with a great sense of location and some gorgeous touches that make the overall experience a pretty memorable one. There is a sumptuous visual element to Face the Raven that lends it to a lot of presence, and the way the episode starts to prickle like sweat on your back that you just cannot reach is very well handled. The whole notion of hidden streets was really imaginative. Finding it was brought to the screen with panache. The first 10 minutes are some of the most entertaining of Series 9, and when we get there, the use of the old monsters in an unusual way was cleverly handled, and the concept of the alien bolt hole opens up storytelling possibilities for the future. This idea could be used again. Clara's death is well handled. The idea that it's her own reckless behaviour of trying to be like the Doctor being her downfall is pretty well executed, and the Doctor's rage as to losing his friend is well performed by Capaldi. For being a fairly standard mystery with a well-crafted ending, Face the Raven gets a permanent tattoo of 25 for this list. Number 24. Eaters of Light. The only episode in the revived series to be written by a classic Who writer. I really admire the children's storybook vibe, which gives the story an air of a mythical fairy tale. Rona Munro does a good job of giving the Doctor a sense of great age, especially when he wants to sacrifice himself to the Gateway. The script captures the essence of Scotland, mud, the damp, it's in every image, every word, and the musical score gives the story a very unique tone compared to the rest of Series 10. Sci-fi elements intertwine well with the setting, offers educational insights to Scottish Roman history. Some of the characters also experience growth here when Bill makes a prejudiced assumption about the sexuality of a Roman soldier, and even grows from this encounter. Other than that, there isn't too much to sing the praises of the Eaters of Light, but it is a nice bit of fluff before the finale and a nice trip to history. Number 23. Woman Who Lived. This is an example of a very good character-driven story, and I'm now able to appreciate it for that. It's a great study of Ashildr/me and how immortality has affected her. She's so different from the Viking girl we saw in The Girl Who Died, and is quite an interesting character. I do like Ashildr in this story, as she's likeable in quite a moral ambiguity way. Maisie Williams gives it her all to infuse Ashildr with lots of depth and emotion, to the point where she could be a great recurring character. Her longing for a new life and her struggle with immortality is wonderful to watch, filled with some palpable emotion, such as the death of her children. It's not just a study of Ashildr, but also of the Doctor as well, and whether his good is everyone else's good. It forces the viewer to ask the question, was he right to save Ashildr's life, and doesn't give them an easy answer, opting for them to interpret this however they want. I don't want to answer it myself either, because that would ruin the pathos this episode has. The Doctor's interactions with Ashildr are really well handled, such as his response to her beliefs around life and death. There's some nice humour in this too. Capaldi and Williams get some great exchanges. Sam Swift is a wonderfully funny character, providing comic relief when it's needed. The whole episode is largely light-hearted in tone, which ironically helps it to be a more deeper study. And then the Space Lion shows up at the end, and I'm out of craps to give. As for having two really good acts, but a really naff third act, The Woman Who Lived is a great insight into eternal life that could have been perfect if it just wasn't for the ending. Number 22, Girl Who Died. I more or less put this sort of mid-season two-parter together, and I feel they're both similar in tone and quality, which is fascinating as I feel it has the opposite problem of The Woman Who Lived. I appreciate this being one of those Doctor Who stories that lets its hair down and has fun for the first two acts and takes the ideas of Vikings fighting aliens and does it in a bonkers way that makes you want to keep watching. The mood shift from comedy and drama to drama and comedy again, exuding the sort of confidence you don't often see these days in Doctor Who. Interesting that by ejecting all the timey-wimey cleverness from the series for 1 week, it allows for more time for the show to breathe, for the people to come to life and for the Doctor and Clara to engage in real conversation. It may be historically inaccurate, but the Vikings are a likeable bunch, and you genuinely care about their fate. I really like the nature of this episode as well, a one-part adventure with consequences that spill off into another individual piece next week. It's a great setup for the price of immortality. For being a run-of-the-mill adventure with a strong ending, The Girl Who Died is best enjoyed with lemonade on a warm summer's day. Number 21, Robot of Sherwood. Closest we get to the 12th Doctor meeting her historical figure, Robot of Sherwood is by no means a great episode, or even one that holds up critically, but it's a great time if you turn off your brain and just enjoy yourself. The Doctor and Robin Hood entering into an ego contest actually makes for some pretty solid jokes, and the general light-hearted feel of this story is pretty fun. However, I really wasn't a fan of how this episode downplayed the Doctor's intelligence multiple times, just to either prop up Clara or for the sake of comedy. Plus the ending with the golden arrow was pretty stupid. Regardless, this is still a fun enough time, and it's entirely skippable for those who don't like it. Though one thing I do like is the ending speech from Robin Hood, that always hits well for me. For being the most vanilla story of the Capaldi era, Robot of Sherwood is a nice historical that won't rank as one of the greatest, but it's a fun time regardless. Number 20, Pilot. The title is pretty accurate, as it does tend to remark a soft reboot for the show, despite it being the 10th series since Doctor Who came back, while also introducing us to Bill and crafting a fun plot in the process. Honestly, I think it succeeds on all fronts very well. The reboot aspect of this is pretty admirable. You don't really need to know anything about the show prior, and yet there are many clear references to past episodes, ranging from Clara to River Song, and Bill makes a great introduction. She's well characterised, funny, and not afraid to call the Doctor out on his actions, all important qualities here. Plus, she may be the only major character in the show whose gayness isn't presented as a quirk, it's simply part of who she is. Other than that, while Heather isn't a particularly strong villain, she more than serves her purpose as the catalyst for 12 to show Bill a preliminary tour of the universe. Overall, it's a good episode and sets up a really good season. It serves as an introductory piece for Bill, and that's enough to recommend from the first episode of Series 10. Number 19, Knock Knock. The story combines haunted houses with student accommodation. Potts and a friend searching for a house to rent. They discover an old mansion with a strange landlord and a mysterious tower, and then of course strange things start happening. The plot here is pretty strong, with a house of youths being digested one by one into the house itself. It doesn't feel padded or too full of action, and it's paced very nicely. I believe this is a hard blend for a writer coming to Doctor Who to nail first go, but Mike Bartlett pulls it off. All around, the acting is great with no weak links, all of the characters are written pretty well, and easy for the actors to play. It's nice to see Bill be in her natural habitat with her own friends. The 12th Doctor is also at his best here, showing his comedic and dark sides, and I think the main reason this story holds up so well is probably Peter Capaldi's performance. Suchet is fantastic here, and it proves why he's such a brilliant actor. His character comes across as gentle and kind, and yet he also displays a cold menace when required to. It's a standout performance. Knock Knock is your fairly standard horror story that isn't anything too special. It's good entertainment nonetheless. 18. Empress of Mars. An episode aimed squarely at the fans, Empress of Mars is a great ending to Mark Gatiss' time as scriptwriter on Doctor Who. The action is well staged and dynamic, the Ice Warriors look better than ever, with the Empress being spectacularly realised, and the guest characters provided some reasonable support. The setting is quite vivid too, and whilst there was nothing particularly standout in their characterisation, the Doctor and Bill were engagingly handled here. I'm sure the classic Who feel was absolutely intentional, and Alpha Centauri suddenly appearing in what might be the most amazing cameo of the revived series was the perfect cherry on top of the cake. I do like the subversions of the evil race trope, and I was very happy that they didn't make Friday out to be a generic bad guy, and that instead he was instrumental for the peace between humans and Ice Warriors. Members of a species having their individual characteristics and motivations, and the expanded world building regarding Martian history makes them feel like a real group of people, rather than just generic bad guys or the monster of the week. I really wish one day we'll get a story dealing with a future human space imperialism, with the human race being the invading aliens instead, pushing the trope subversion even further. As for the group of humans, there were some nice characterizations, most importantly of all the Colonel, who has some nice and cheesy moments with the Ice Warrior Queen, but didn't feel too out of place, fitting in with the tone of the adventure. Empress of Mars is Mark Gatiss' love letter to Doctor Who, and I'm all here for it. It's fan service from beginning to end, and that's enough to recommend for me. Number 17. Dark Water and Death in Heaven. The ever-controversial Series 8 finale certainly has its detractors and defenders, and count me as one of the defenders. The reaction to Dark Water was complete critical acclaim when it first aired, and I can accredit that to three familiar Doctor Who staples: the return of the Cybermen, the return of the Master, and the return of two-parters. However, there is a great deal more than that to recommend in Dark Water, but that triple whammy of surprises in the last 10 minutes leaves me gripped to this day. It continues the theme that were mooted in a very in-your-face fashion. What's the one thing more appalling than people being burnt alive and begging for you to stop while it's happening? People being shoved back in their decaying bodies and brought back to life. Missy admitting that our dead far outweigh the living in terms of numbers, how we wouldn't have a hope in hell if they were directed to slaughter us, is a really great concept. And using these dead bodies to turn them into Cybermen is a great idea, and the image of Danny Pink being squashed into a cyber suit is haunting imagery. And whilst the Cybermen may be underused as they come across as Missy's soldiers more than anything else, I do love this interpretation of the Master, with Michelle Gomez giving an incredible performance, and you get the sense that her and the Doctor are best frenemies, something I've not really felt since the John Pertwee era between the Doctor and the Master. For being a fascinatingly morbid take on the afterlife, the Series 8 finale may not be perfect, but I think it's a great story nonetheless. Number 16. Time Heist. Time Heist not only continues to test the 12th Doctor's relationships with others, but it feels like unlike anything you would have seen in the previous Doctor's era, a glossy high-stakes heist akin to Ocean's 11, with the hallmarks of the Doctor's adventure in space and time. New cohorts, a striking monster, and a timey-wimey complication. This feels like the point where the new era of Doctor Who was truly starting to form. The production values for this episode feel very unique for the most part. Paxos Bank looks so clean and sterile, like any bank would kill to look like, but it's contrasted well with its dark and rusty basements that the Doctor and his friends have to start traversing. The characterisation is also pretty strong. The Doctor gets to be brash and say shut up more than ever. Clara's got a lot to worry about with the mission on a personal level, and Angela enjoyed seeing more became more common around this time, and Sai and Cybra make for great one-time companions too. You get the sense that they would have been joined by a third or fourth newcomer in an earlier draft, or if this episode was made for an earlier era, but they trimmed the fat and made them just more compelling characters with more screen time. However, Mrs. Delphox is a great villain, played impeccably by Keely Hawes. For most of the story, she's a cunning, no-nonsense fox with a love for her job, but the ending reveals a more insecure side to her, and let's just say, relatives as well. The ending to the story could have been predictable, but it was earned through great performances and a keen sense of timing over when the audience will be asking questions. And while I personally thought the teller's usage was a bit thin, you can have a story like this in Doctor Who without needing an obvious monster. Its powers are captivating, and it gets a sweet ending for being the best from writer Steve Thompson. Time Heist is a fun and confident story in the 12th Doctor era. Number 15, Last Christmas. The Christmas special that's certainly grown on me over the years. The dream within a dream plot is something that every sci-fi show has to have pop at some point, and it usually works within its rigid formula. Doctor Who nails this by making it as funny, scary and quirky as possible. Stephen Moffat subverts all the cliches by refusing to acknowledge at any point that what we are seeing is the truth once the cat is out of the bag. He plays the same trick over and over until you're wondering if we will ever see reality again, and it really works. Even when the Doctor and Clara hop off in the TARDIS at the end, you could still be waiting for one more twist that this happy ending wasn't authentic, but it was, of course. That's how much Moffat can make me doubt what was fiction and what was reality. It's a really great take on the dream plotline. I especially love that the knockout twist that the entire base under siege scenario is a massive con. So much so that what happens during this episode marks it as one of the least relevant in the show's history because everything that we experience is a lie. Escaping that lie, though, is the entire point of the story. Now, on a character level, this is one of the most relevant stories in the whole of the Moffat era. It gives the Doctor and Clara a chance to reveal their deceptions from the end of Death in Heaven, and part company in an honest fashion where they acknowledge exactly what they think of each other. Last Christmas is a really good special, and 10 years on, I can truly say it is one of the stronger Christmas specials. Number 14, Hellbent. Hey, remember when this was the most controversial finale? Before the days of the Timeless Children and Bi-generation, we had the hybrid. Nevertheless, I am a pretty staunch defender of Hellbent. Every single interaction between Capaldi and Coleman is astonishingly written and wonderfully moving, and it's really wonderful to see the Doctor pushed in a way that we haven't seen in a while, acting as an inverse of the way Clara herself acted at the start of episodes like Dark Water. I think people often forget how long Clara has been with the Doctor, not just in terms of screen time, but also in-universe, of how long she's been in the Doctor's mind. She was the face that intersected his long struggle on Trenzalore, she was the person that was in his mind during the billions of years inside the confession dial, and to think that the Time Lord's collective negligence over something so minor and ultimately pointless cost the life of this one person, it's perfectly understandable that the Doctor would go a little off the rails here. It's not like he's never done this before, and I'm sure every bad encounter with Time Lord society is boiling under his skin. And now for a completely cold take here, Capaldi is once again an absolute powerhouse in this episode, delivering some of his best acting as the Doctor, which says a lot considering how consistently astonishing he was. The Doctor breaking all his own rules in Hellbent wasn't at all a sudden deviation from his character, but in fact clearly signalled in nearly every episode leading up to it in Series 9. Every episode, the Doctor is confronted with the possibility of Clara's death, testing his commitments to the moral code that he sets himself. Every episode separates them and contrasts Clara's capability with the Doctor's caution. It's obvious as the season builds up that there's only one place this can end. Clara will die, and the Doctor will break everything in response. For pushing the boundaries of the Doctor-companion relationship, Hellbent will have its defenders and its harsh critics, but count me as a defender. Number 13. The Husbands of River Song. A final fitting appearance for River Song, The Husbands of River Song has a thread of sentimentality to it that enveloped me and left me feeling as though I'd been embraced by a close friend in a very intimate moment. Peter Capaldi and Alex Kingston turn this bizarre pantomime into something extremely watchable, their chemistry lighting up the story in every scene that they're in. Just when you think that the whole piece is going to be a disposable watch at Christmas time, and as a piece of fluff that Moffat pulls off a massive coup at the climax by expertly weaving this story into River's character arc and providing some closure for her. It's performed in a way that feels perfectly natural, and the feeling of romance and closeness between these two characters who have been through thick and thin together is very palpable. Whilst it may not have the most engaging plot, The Husbands of River Song is a bright, colourful, festive adventure perfectly enjoyed on Christmas Day. Number 12. Deep Breath. Whilst this episode didn't do much to justify it being an hour long, Deep Breath is still a great introduction for the 12th Doctor. The plot is solid, but nothing too spectacular like the 11th Doctor's introduction. Clara lamenting the passing of 11 is a little annoying at times. but the payoff at the end works well for the handing off of the baton, and I can see the difference Jenna Coleman has made due to the change in the Doctor, which is always a plus. She shifts to a more profound companion for the Doctor, one that looks deeper into his character and develops a deeper connection come the end of the episode. The standout of this episode, however, is Peter Capaldi and how he brings the 12th Doctor alive. From his physical presence to the more emotional and reflected moments, this is highlighted perfectly in scenes such as the kidnapping of the horse and the genius scene with the homeless man in the alley. Peter Capaldi brings a weightier presence for the Doctor that is so very different to the confident and raggedy Doctor we got in the 11th Hour. Yet it's so obvious that they are same character, which is, I believe, the key to the brilliant casting here. Whilst Deep Breath won't rank as one of the best debut stories, it's still a great start for the 12th Doctor. Number 11. Thin Ice. You'd think opening with an elephant on the ice would be playing their cards too early, but Thin Ice has a lot going for it. With its atmospheric and playful setting, the unusual reveal of the creature being misjudged, the enjoyable characterization of the Doctor and Bill, the drama of asking the question of whether the Doctor has killed somebody, and dealing with the emotional fallout of that and the astonishing production values, almost as if you've stepped right back into history. Countering that is the fact that there is nothing truly original happening here. There are old jokes like wandering through history, exploitative villains, a deadly creature that turns out to be benevolent, the Doctor's checkered past, but it all feels presented in a new way. But given they are presented so stylishly here, it's pulled off very well. Thin Ice is just shy of being an out-and-out classic because of this, but it achieves what it sets out to do to a very high standard indeed. It's a story that's well crafted, well characterised, and just well filmed. Take a step out of the TARDIS and enjoy a night at the Frost Fair of old London town. It's a historical certainly worth celebrating. Number 10. Extremis. A very tight script. On first viewing, Extremis may feel like it's scattering of ideas and random scenes for its first half, but the story coalesces beautifully around its big twist. How the clues are staggered throughout the episode are impressively done, with each step taking us closer to the truth. It's an episode that rewards subsequent viewings in that respect, but along the way there are great lines, an intriguing plot, and some good laughs. Further examination of the Doctor's blindness, some gorgeous moments between Bill and Nardole, and terrific production values. It is really the last 10 minutes that do astound me. Nardole confronting the truth of reality, Bill struggling to come to terms with her situation, and the Doctor proving that he is the hero, no matter how he has been constructed. The icing on the cake is the return of Missy, and the knowledge that she has been in the vault all this time is a bit predictable, but it means that we can finally move on with the vault arc plot instead of it being long-winded and drawn out. Extremis would be a bit higher on this list, but the conclusion of the Monk arc in the next two episodes lets it down a lot, but it's still worthy enough to make it into the top 10 12th Doctor stories. Number 9. The Zygon Invasion and the Zygon Inversion. It was about time the Zygons were properly modernised in the new series. Their fling with the 50th made it seem as though they'd never left, but here they truly get a chance to shine because this two-parter has so much on offer. Great mysteries, excellently dark tone, and a superb utilisation of the Zygons. A war's broken out, leaving everyone paranoid, and that paranoia is a good thing. Let the trouble commence. That's the creepy thing about this two-parter. The characters' fears and biases are completely justifiable. Not ideal, but the predicament has thrown them all off balance. Most of the Zygons are still trying to live in peace, so they're just as much a victim of the confusion as humanity is. Unit, however, doesn't see it that way, and the Doctor has to keep convincing everyone that it's barbaric to be so forceful against even an alien menace. And yet within this whispered conflict there are some lovely subtle touches and visuals, and the comment that utopia never lasts forever and somebody will always come along and destroy the vision that you have fought so hard for is so achingly profound. I was astonished that I had never had the point elucidated on Doctor Who or TV before with quite such clarity. What is war really for when nothing ever lasts forever? When there will always be another tyrant unhappy with the status quo? Why not sit down and talk instead of fighting when fighting is just ultimately pointless? It's a very worthy message, beautifully put across, that certainly makes this two-parter one of Capaldi's strongest. Number 8. Under the Lake and Before the Flood. This is a very much a typical base under siege story, but it's done incredibly well. Too many stories in that format can get old very quickly, but this one keeps things very fresh, and I'm quite surprised that they did. On paper, it does sound pretty formulaic, and if you've watched a lot of Doctor Who over the years, you probably won't like the sound of this one. Basically, you have an underwater base, ghosts terrorising the crew, the Doctor and Clara have to figure out why, and yeah, it doesn't sound particularly interesting, but it's done really well, with the plot adding in some new elements to keep it all fresh. The side characters in this story are very memorable, and they just don't feel like the same characters with a different face on. I find Cass a particularly interesting character, because she's deaf and has to communicate through sign language. This could just feel like something that was put in for no real reason, but her lip-reading abilities are actually used well in this story, when the ghosts are silently repeating the same phrases over and over again. And it introduces quite another paradox, but does so rather cleverly and interestingly, and it touches on the dark moral decisions of the Doctor yet again. Thankfully in this episode it's not used too badly, and it does show how the Doctor stands up against evil and makes decisions to try and save as many people as possible. The time travel element is used really well, and the whole plot is very strong. All the characters are well established and continue to be throughout the two-parter, and for being a pretty subversive two-parter, this story rightfully ranks as one of my favourites from the Capaldi era. Number 7. Into the Dalek. The Moffat era didn't have the best track record when it came to Dalek stories, but this one easily ranks as the best from this era. Into the Dalek is a great story, action-packed, rich in topical themes, featuring guest performances from the cast and with some interesting things to say about the Daleks. A shallow interpretation of this story that you often see is that it's simply a retread of what we saw in 2005's Dalek. And yes, there are similarities. A damaged Dalek prisoner, a sudden escape, extermination spree, the phrase good Dalek. But in practice, these two are quite opposites. Into the Dalek depicts a standard Dalek who, untainted by human DNA, saw the futility of the Dalek race and wanted to change, but was held back by its own evil engineering, until it saw something it could truly adopt for its own, the Doctor's pure hatred for the Daleks, which it reveres in. When Rusty says the Doctor is a good Dalek, he's implying that even at his best, the Doctor is simply a Dalek, but with a strict moral code. The Doctor discovered who he was by defining himself as the opposition to the Daleks, but if he himself is more like a Dalek than he realises, what does that mean for his definition of who he is? Into the Dalek establishes many of the themes that will go on to become important later in the Capaldi era. It's essential viewing for the 12th Doctor's time in the TARDIS, and it's undoubtedly the best Dalek story of the Steven Moffat era, by a wide margin. Number 6. Oxygen. This episode is Doctor Who firing on all cylinders. Bold, original, clever, tense, beautifully paced, characterful, funny and satisfying. In the Capaldi era, this is the benchmark that everyone else should be working to as well, I think. Just as Moffat was the standout under the RTD era, Jamie Matheson more than proves how much of a great writer he is under the Moffat era. And what you have is a threat on the inside, the oxygen suits that are working against you, and the outside, the dead-eyed zombies attacking you en masse, and two companions that are allowed to be absolutely terrified. It's the tensest the show has been for quite some time, and it's a formula for success that the show traded in for many years in the classic series that I thought had just been forgotten. Add in an already terrifying environment and you have a Doctor Who episode that ticks all the right boxes when it comes to scaring you. This is the bonding exercise that the Doctor, Bill and Nardole needed as well. A race to survive together, and a feeling that they are a group of friends working together to get out of this situation. Each of the regulars get a time to shine, with blindness, oxygen starvation, and it holds back from being indulgent or overly spectacular like so much of this era. It focuses on a tricky situation with a small group of characters and some very clever ideas. The direction is fantastic, capturing the claustrophobia and terror of the setting with the precision of Scalpel. The performances are first rate, the music underscores rather than overwhelming the action, and the final scene is fantastic. Oxygen is brilliant. I generally do get short of breath watching this, and it's just short of the top 5. Number 5. Mummy on the Orient Express. This story is remarkably entertaining throughout. It's top-notch, comfy Doctor Who, an interesting premise for a monster, a great supporting cast, expertly paced waves of tension, and some great character stuff with the 12th Doctor and Clara at the end. The solution to the conflict is a little rushed, but at least that solution is clever. This is the classic Who formula firing on all cylinders, and is easily one of the highlights of Series 8. The sets look fantastic, seamlessly blending the 1930s and sci-fi aesthetics. The train feels confined, the characters are trapped in this environment, but it never becomes too claustrophobic to watch. Neither does the direction feel cluttered despite some lovely attention to detail in the background. The exterior shots of the Orient Express are gorgeous, truly picturesque, and while The Mummy is excellent, it's a traditional yet realistic and subtly detailed design, creepy without being excessively gory. The dialogue sparkles throughout, and the themes are all presented thoughtfully and interesting. Even the musical number is really good. The whole episode is absorbing, exciting, clever, and exactly the kind of Doctor Who magic that I love to see. Number 4. Flatline. Flatline is Doctor Who being made for adults with very little in the way of light relief, pleasant characters or quirky settings, and it truly has a foreboding menace here. You wouldn't want the show to be like this every week, but my goodness has it pulled its socks up and delivered something unique and transfixing. What I loved about this story was how it just never stopped giving. It opened up in a unique approach with the shrinking TARDIS. And rather than just play that clever idea, it kept delivering surprises after surprises and ingenious notions until your brain starts wrestling with them. Writer Jamie Matheson pins them to a gripping narrative that puts Clara centre stage and allows her to really shine. With stunning direction from Douglas McKinnon, Flatline is packed full of memorable images with a tangible sense of tension, and it's no wonder writer Jamie Matheson won Best Writer of the Year for Series 8. Number 3. Listen. Listen practically defies a lot of explanation and will leave viewers as thrilled as it will irritated, I think. But I kind of like that. It's Doctor Who pushing the boundaries again and not rejecting Hollywood concessions for the audience. Listen expects some people to be appalled and others to be aghast at all the liberties it takes, and others to be bowled over by the exploration of the unknown. Listen deliberately asks more questions than it answers, which is bound to cause a portion of the Doctor Who fan base to be pissed off at this episode, but it's taking an intellectual approach to exploring fear, and it may not reach the anxiety levels of Midnight, it does get very close. This exposes the major difference between Stephen Moffat and RTD. One is discussing what makes things frightening, and the other is just simply being frightening. You decide which approach you prefer. It's exquisitely shot, full of strong ideas, and trying to say something vital about the character of the Doctor. Listen, for me, is a fantastic analysis of fear that will forever be our constant companion, and I really love the episode for that. Number 2. Heaven Sent. This is not only a brave episode, but it redefines what a Doctor Who story can be, and Stephen Moffat achieves this by smashing through the boundaries and changing the shape of the series into something entirely unique, and it's all just for one episode. The presentation, the horror, the strength of performance from our lead actor, the poetry in the writing, the surprises, everything about this episode is adult in a way that New Who rarely dares to be. It's one of those stories similar to, say, The Waters of Mars, that could take place at a particular point in the Doctor's timeline, which makes even its placing entirely unique. The Doctor has lost his best friend and is trapped in his own personal hell. It's a terrifying labyrinth inside a puzzle box where he's stalked by a dark wraith that seeks not his fear but his honesty. Peter Capaldi gives a career-defining performance in what is practically a one-man show, and he just rivets me from start to finish for almost an hour. It's a bold move to show that the Doctor this afraid and this menaced by his own personal demons, since he's our constant companion in this series, and he is one that the kiddies latch onto for comfort. Goodness knows what younger viewers made of this existential nightmare. I can imagine they were either sitting there frightened or maybe a bit bored by it. Now, funnily enough, this is one of those stories that I probably don't revisit too often, as I wouldn't want Doctor Who to be like this every week. However, I can't take that away from Heaven Sent, because it's just an episode to be placed in a special vault, reserved for those episodes that remind me just how astonishingly good Doctor Who can really be. Heaven Sent is a masterpiece for a damn good reason. Number 1. World Enough and Time and The Doctor Falls. Without a doubt, the best Cyberman and Master story of the revived series, the series 10 finale has the full package. The opening where Bill is shot within 5 minutes is such a heavy and brutal moment that really sets the tone for the rest of the story. Everything is just superb. The pacing is perfect the whole way throughout, and the story handles all of its elements excellently. The Cybermen have never been as well portrayed or as terrifying on screen as they are in this episode. It's one of the very few Cybermen stories that properly manages to show the horror of cyber conversion. The The scene where Bill hears the patient saying pain over and over again, and then the nurse comes to help him, but we see all that she did was turn down the volume on his communicator, is such a harrowing and dark scene that I'm really surprised they got away with it. These Cybermen really feel like people who went through a horrific process to remove their humanity, and are in pain every second of their existence, and that horror is exactly what the Cybermen should be. The idea of using a black hole and relativity to mess with time on the spaceship is a really clever idea, and I love how it's incorporated into the story, without feeling too clever or self-indulgent. The fact Bill had to wait over 10 years for the Doctor while it was only 5 minutes for him is heartbreaking to watch, and that whole final scene where the Doctor encounters the converted Bill is such a gut punch. It's such a dark fate for a companion, and that final shot of Bill crying inside the cybersuit is a great cliffhanger. The Doctor Falls is equally as great as well. Peter Capaldi gives a fantastic performance. He really shows us exactly the kind of person the Doctor is in this episode, and his speech to the Master just sums up the Doctor's character so well, and it's just an amazing scene from any era of Doctor Who. Missy's character arc is also handled very well throughout the whole story. Her scenes with John Sims' Master are amazing, and I love the chemistry the two of them have. It's crazy it took over 50 years for anyone to do a multi-Master story on TV. The final moment between the two of them, where Missy decides to stand with the Doctor and kill her former self, only for him to kill her in turn, is such a great scene on so many levels. Missy's decision to stand with the Doctor finally completes her arc, and the Doctor's death mirror each other quite nicely, as they both do the right thing, without hope, without witness, and without any reward, showing that they aren't really so different after all. The Master committing essentially what is double suicide is just very in character for them, and if there ever was to be a final Master story, this should have been it, even though I do love Sacha Dhawan's Master. I do love that scene so much, and it's a perfect ending for Missy. It's heartbreaking that the Doctor never even finds out that he got his friend back right at the end. World Enough and Time and The Doctor Falls will forever go down as one of Doctor Who's greatest achievements in storytelling. And that's all for the 12th Doctor era. Let me know in the comments below what your favourite stories are, and join me next time when Jodie Whittaker will be handed the TARDIS keys.